Hi, welcome to my video. Today I will talk to you about a must-read Asian American novel, The Foreign Student by Susan Choi. The novel is set in 1955 and is about the romantic relationship between a Korean man named Chang and an American girl named Catherine. Chang arrives in the United States on a scholarship to study at the University of the South in Sewanee, Tennessee, after the Korean War. At Sewanee, he meets Catherine and falls in love with her. But their relationship runs into many obstacles, including Catherine's pre-existing relationship with another man, the language barrier, as well as the racial discrimination Chang faces as an Asian living in America. By reading this novel, you can get a sense of what life must have been like for non-white people living in America in the 1950s. It is beautifully written and takes us through the love that develops between two troubled people from vastly different worlds. First, let's take a look at the map of the United States and see where exactly Sewanee, the backdrop of today's novel, is. As you can see, Sewanee, Tennessee is located in Southern America, with the nearest big cities being Nashville and Atlanta. And the University of the South, which is the school that our protagonist Chang attends, is located about 2 hours' drive away from Nashville. Here are some photos of the University of the South. Note that the campus is very beautiful, especially in autumn, which is the season the novel is set in. You can also see that the campus is filled with Gothic-style buildings and is surrounded by beautiful nature. So now, let's get into the actual material. The topic of today's video is, quote, "They don't know what to make me," unquote, the ambiguity of Chang's racial location in the American South. The 1950s and 60s America were a period of the civil rights movement. It was a struggle for social justice for Black Americans to gain equal rights under the law in the United States. The Civil War had officially abolished slavery, but discrimination against Black people had continued, especially in the South. So by the mid-20th century, Black Americans, along with many white Americans, mobilized and began to fight for equality in an unprecedented scale for 2 decades. Chang is granted scholarship to study in a university alongside white students and becomes friends with Crane, whose father is no other than a Grand Dragon in the Ku Klux Klan. When Chang visits their home and is being served turkey at the dinner table, Crane's father tells him, quote, "I am giving you white meat and dark. You will develop a preference in time. You may develop a preference right away. If you do, exercise it," unquote. What came to my mind as I read this subtly demanding gesture of a white supremacist was the attitude of American imperialism after World War II, and how the Cold War not only consisted of an opposition of ideology between the two superpowers, but it was a competition of how quickly and securely the US and the USSR could recruit the decolonizing nations to their respective camps. While Stalin's Soviet Union adopted a much more politically oppressive stance towards its satellite states, particularly in the Eastern Europe, the US constructed an image as a benevolent big brother nation who was willing to provide economic aid and win over the hearts of the smaller, weaker states by allowing them to see with their own eyes the benefits of democracy and capitalism. Europe was of the highest importance to both the US and the USSR, and the Truman administration provided huge economic aids through Marshall Plan to the war-torn Western European countries, in a way similar to how Crane's father offers meat to his guest and expects Chang to eventually follow the example of his host in his preference of the type of meat. In Sewanee, Chang is, quote, "not black but not quite white in a racially bipolar South," unquote. His non-whiteness makes him an outsider in the Southern community, but his non-blackness also opens him up to possibilities of recruitment to either side, and Chang intuitively realizes that the hospitality and generosity he receives from various hosts in Sewanee stems from this very potential. Outside the college grounds, wherever he goes, he is an object of wonder and curiosity. When accompanied by Catherine, a white girl, people's staring becomes even more glaring. It is impossible for Chang to feel included or accepted in this southern state. In fact, he senses that his position is somehow more comparable to that of the black staff of the college than to the white students. In his first week at school, he shakes hands with a colored table servant and is told off by his friend Crane that he can't be casual with them. So he realizes that even though he is not white, as a student at a university, people expect him to conduct himself as a master over the black servants. Over the Christmas break, when he is left alone in the dormitory after everybody else has gone home for the holiday, he realizes that there is a distance between himself and the black college staff, who clearly find it uncomfortable to eat in his presence when he joins them in the dining hall. After that one time, he never goes down to the dining hall for meals anymore. At the end of the novel, when he agrees to work alongside the same group of staff to work off his debt, he seems much more at ease than he ever was when he was a student in the same school. He finds that they accept him with humor and never peer into his thoughtful silences, and that their company shelter him. But it is obvious that he could never become genuinely one of them, the same way he could never truly belong to the white community. Quote, "They don't know what to make me," unquote. This is Chang's statement to Catherine early in the novel, and it captures the reality of his racial ambiguity in the American South, where there were not enough Asian Americans to form a community of their own, like in bigger cities such as Chicago or New York. His racial ambiguity in the American South is reminiscent of the equally ambiguous identity he experienced in Korea as a translator for USIS. He writes about his own sense of identity. Quote, "The prospect of selling the US to South Korea suddenly seemed much more attractive than that of selling South Korea to the US. He crossed over. He knew he couldn't get out of the loop. He had already sensed that, like his father, he had no real place in South Korea. He was the third thing that people like Hodge both despised and required. Translation's unnatural byproduct," unquote. In other words, he is neither the original text nor the translation. He's somewhere in between, trapped in a political no man's land in Korea and a racial one in America. The imbrication of colonial history with interethnic commonality between Asian Americans. There is one place that Chang does feel at home, that is in Chicago's Little Tokyo. Not because he was mistaken for a Japanese or spoke fluent Japanese, but because people there looked like him, and they took him for what he always dreamed of being, a scholar. He was treated like, quote, "a shabby aristocrat," end quote. In Little Tokyo, he was a scholar because that was what he did. It is only when he is situated in an Asian community that he can finally be identified by what he does and not by how he looks. He enjoys a status and reputation that he could never hope to obtain in Sewanee, where he is an object to be stared at, cared for, or simply cast away. Central to the Asian American discursive frame is the assertion of an interethnic commonality between the various groups that comprise it, meaning the various nationalities of Asians can be lumped together as Asian Americans and treated as a collective entity because the host society has treated them all alike, regardless of what differences there may exist between their cultures, languages, religions, etc. It is deeply ironic that Japanese, the language of oppression and discrimination during the occupation era, becomes the tool with which Chang is seamlessly assimilated into the Asian American community. It is also what sets him apart from the Korean nationals who travel overseas today. Thank you for watching today's video. See you next time!